Junji Ito's longest comic is probably Uzumaki. Fact check me on that. It's rare that Ito dedicates one volume to a whole story. Hell, it's rare that he dedicates more than one chapter to one story sometimes. But those longer narratives tend to take the spotlight. You have stuff like Soichi, Tomie, Uzumaki, and those are instantly recognizable. But what about his shorter and more forgotten works? I will be telling you 3 short stories from the mind of Junji Ito from various collections of his work. And I bet you haven't read them. And if I'm wrong, and you have read all of these, then you probably read almost everything that this guy has covered, because how did you find these? Hi, I'm Lorelai, and I read a lot of stuff. I do commentary, recaps, and summaries on a bunch of different manga that I find interesting, whether it's new, niche, or popular. Who knows, the next one I talk about could end up being one of your favorites. If that's something you're interested in, consider subscribing. On to the video. Koseki is starting a new job at a mansion. What exactly that job is, he doesn't really know. All that he knows is that he's going to be living in the mansion itself while he works there. When he arrives at the mansion for the first time, though, he sees that the windows are all completely bricked up and the doors are made of cast iron. The mansion from the outside practically looks like a dungeon. A creepy old man answers the door through a tiny sliver and asks Koseki to hurry up inside. He explains that his son is ill and he has to keep all the light from outside. Koseki doesn't ask too many questions. As the old man's leading Koseki through the mansion, a worker of some kind is rushing down the stairs and he smashes into the old man. He apologizes but says that he's finished working, so he's gonna skedaddle now. He practically sprints out of the mansion without talking to the old man very much. Despite the old man literally bleeding from his head and Koseki concerned about him since elderly people are more fragile, the old man says that he's fine and that his son is probably feeling much worse all the time. When we get into the son's bedroom, he starts shouting that he's in a lot of pain and he begs his mother to make it stop. She asks where he's having pain and he lifts his arm and points above his head, seemingly nowhere. His mother reaches out and starts massaging the air, which looks really silly, like she's just fiddling, but Yosuke actually calms down a little bit. The old man explains to Koseki that his son, Yosuke, feels pain everywhere. Like, not just his body, everywhere in the house. We meet Misano, who is Koseki's co-worker. Misano's been doing this job for a while, and he shows Koseki how to go about alleviating Yosuke's pain. Basically, they have these walkie-talkies where when Yosuke is in pain, somebody tells them where the location is on the walkie-talkie, and they go throughout the entire mansion to go like this to the spot. The pain could theoretically be anywhere in the house, and the reason the old man blocked out the windows isn't to stop the light from coming in, but it's to stop the area that Yosuke feels pain from spreading out, hoping that that somehow contains it. Well, his first time massaging for Yosuke, Koseki goes like this, but he feels something in his hands, so he shrieks and he falls over. He knocks Misano off of a small ladder, so Misano is a little pissed at him, but whatever he felt in his hand is now gone. As time goes on, we're starting to see that the other workers don't really feel any pain, just like the old man did. In fact, Yosuke's father's wound on his forehead got so infected, he died without ever seeing a hospital. As time goes on, the workers are starting to succumbing to their illnesses because the wounds and gashes on their legs that go untreated are getting really dark and gross. But Koseki lately has done the complete opposite. He's become really sensitive to pain. Small things like bumping his head invoke a really extreme reaction from him. Yosuke's mother promises to hand over the family fortune to whoever stays and protects her son from the pain, because the son is all she has left at this point now that the father has passed. Despite this, Koseki asks for the key to leave the mansion because things are getting really weird around here. After all, he's getting more sensitive, so maybe he should go get a checkup. And he also encourages all of the other workers to go get a checkup because their wounds are looking fucking nasty. The workers, though, are suspicious why Koseki wants to open the door so bad. They think he's trying to trick them so that he can get them out and lock them out so that Koseki is the one that gets the fortune. They begin to get really stir crazy and decide the only way to get the fortune is to kill both the mother and the helpless Yosuke. But after they've already killed them, they realize they don't know where she's hidden the fortune, leaving their deaths to be essentially meaningless. Not only that, now the key to leave the mansion is lost forever and nobody knows where it is, so the windows are boarded up with cast iron and bricks and they have no way to get out. As the workers' injuries worsen, causing disgusting infections and sepsis, they start to drop like flies until only Koseki is left. His sensitivity deepens until the smallest bump sends waves of debilitating pain throughout his body. He seems to take the place of Yosuke, feeling the intense and swelling pain throughout the mansion everywhere, even when nobody's inside. He screams that he can't stand it, and despite being the only one left in the mansion, The comic ends. There's a certain familiarity in pain, and humans are going to exist right somewhere in the middle. If something hurts, we know that something in our body is wrong and we go to inspect it. And if we can't figure it out, we go to somewhere like a doctor. If we feel no pain at all our entire lives, it makes our deaths all the more strange and kind of untimely when we get hurt if we don't realize that we've been hurt that bad. On the other side of the spectrum, intense pain is nothing but torment. For some reason, the mansion chooses one person to experience one side of the extreme and everyone else to experience the other side. But y'all, I'm gonna level with you. I didn't really enjoy this comic all that much. It's quite short, which isn't the problem, and the idea of a person feeling pain within space itself is kind of cool. Especially the idea that our pain is kind of critical to our survival, even if it sucks when we experience it. But I don't know, this comic just didn't deliver really on the horror aspect the way that Ito's comics normally do. I was expecting Yosuke to somehow be able to control the mansion or see everywhere inside, or maybe he would become an antagonist or something. And if Kozeki got stuck inside the mansion and Yosuke's the only one left, now they have to fight, but he can't hide, and just overall I thought it would be more interesting that way. The second half of the story, where the workers go stir crazy, kind of feels a bit random and rushed. I wish Ito kind of let this one simmer and cook a little bit more in his mind before he published this one. But luckily with our next story, you'll see how much better Ito's writing can get. Our next story was published in the Venus in the Blind Spot collection titled Okumon Bochi, or Billions Alone. Michio is a hikikomori. He never goes outside, and he hasn't for 7 years at this point. In Japan, as I mentioned in my review of Children by Miura Miyu, you become an adult when you turn 20 years old, and there's a ceremony called the Coming of Age Ceremony, or Seijin no Hi, that is scheduled for those who are about to turn 20 years old. You don't have to be exactly 20, but around the time you get to be 20, you get invited. It's just a ceremony, so don't think too much about it. Well, Michio gets an invitation to his coming of age ceremony. He's turning 20 years old, having spent most of his teenage years in his bedroom. His mother sort of enables this behavior, but otherwise seems pretty checked out of her son's existence, other than being pretty permissible in what he does. Well, Michio's childhood crush from middle school, Natsuko, shows up and informs him that they're holding a school reunion and that she'd like for him to attend. She tells him that they've been pretty worried about him since he stopped coming to middle school. She and Michio know damn well that he stopped showing up because he was bullied pretty bad, but neither of them seemingly want to talk about it very much. Well, she drags him out of the house to a small get-together with like 2 or 3 other guys. They each do this annoying thing where they point at their face and is like, huh, do you remember me? Oh my god, Michio, do you remember me? And Michio is obviously not having it. It's kind of annoying. Michio also gets kind of upset when he learns that Natsuko is getting married to one of these guys, but he tells them congratulations regardless, which is good because he might be a bit of a loser, but at least he's not an incel. That does kind of ruin his hopes in being with Natsuko though. He does excuse himself and begins to go home, and when one of the guys runs after him, he tells him he just isn't all that interested in hanging out or attending the reunion really. On his way back home, he stops by a lake and discovers a really large crowd. He pushes through the crowd a little bit and takes a look down into the lake, wondering what the hell they could be looking at. And then he sees the body of 6 people who are haphazardly sewn and stitched together. As they're looking at these bodies, a big jet flies overhead and it drops hundreds, if not thousands, of pamphlets. And on these pamphlets, it reads, "Billions alone, all together. Billions alone, now all together." This group is then labeled as a T-word organization called Billions Alone. And rumors begin to surface online that if you go out as a group, you'll eventually become a target of this group. As time passes by, a few paranoid individuals begin to stay home and not go out, as the number of cases starts to increase of people sewn and stitched together. But a large majority of the population tend to not care all that much. The day of the coming of age ceremony / reunion day starts to come, and a few people have canceled, but Natsuko is determined to still hold the event. Michio, maybe out of FOMO or whatever other reason, decides that he's still going to attend, but maybe slip into the background a little bit. As he lurks outside the building, a few police officers try and detain him, claiming that he must be a member of the Billions Alone group. Well, he's not, spoiler alert, and he's only let go after Natsuko shows up and demands that they let him go, that he was invited to the event. She and Michio walk together back to the building where they open the door, and everyone is gone. All of the 500 people from the middle school that decided to attend are suddenly missing, one of which is including Natsuko's fiance. A little while later, a massive conglomerate is discovered in the woods as the biggest amalgamation of sewn together bodies that has been found thus far. I don't think I can show you the manga panel for that. Well, after that incident, this thing happening becomes the norm. Both Natsuko and Michio at this point, as well as everyone else, just stays in their respective homes, just thankful that they haven't been taken as well. At this point, it's around Christmas time. However, Natsuko laments on the phone with Michio that at this point, even if her fiance was still alive, it's not like she would be able to go see him without the threat of getting stitched together at some point. Michio, either because he's a good guy and wants to comfort her, or because he sees this as an opportunity to get with her, decides to go visit her at her house anyway. He runs to her home and stumbles upon Natsuko outside, sewing both of her parents and her dog together, chanting "Billions alone, all together. Billions alone, now all together." So it's revealed that she was a member of the Billions Alone group all this time. I don't mind this one at all. I quite enjoyed this story. I feel like it's a bit anticlimactic to just have a terrorist group behind it all. I mean, it would be cooler in my opinion if it was like a supernatural force, like Uzumaki, you know what I mean? It attacks randomly and you don't know if you're going to be safe or not. There's no way to check if the people in your group are a member of this group. After all, how on earth did 500 people go missing in a matter of literal minutes? You're going to tell me that a group did that and didn't get caught, like, at all? I think at the end it would have been better if he goes home and he figures out that Natsuko has already been sewn together with all of her parents. By showing us that humans are the cause of this, it makes me think too hard about the logistics of how they did it. And that takes away the horror element for me a little bit. You can run away from a person, but maybe not a supernatural entity. Something that is more godlike, something that you don't understand. We understand people. We understand how crazy people can get. Alright, the last one we're going to be talking about is Ningen Isu, not the metal band, but rather Junji Ito's retelling of the story, The Human Chair. This short story is actually one that Junji Ito didn't originally write, but rather he put his own spin on. If you watch Wendigoon, you may have seen his video on Ningen Shikaku, or No Longer Human, which was originally a novel written by Osamu Dazai about himself. It's a quasi-non-fiction story. And both Wendigoon and I think that Junji Ito did a very good well on his retelling of Ningen Shikaku. However, The Human Chair is another retelling, but it's much, much, much shorter in length because the short story is shorter. Ningen Shikaku isn't a short story, it's a novel. This one is just... Ningen Isu is a short story written by Edogawa Rampo in 1925, meaning it was written shortly after the Meiji era ended and the Taisho era began. In the original version of the script, I wrote a really long and really nerdy rundown of the politics and writers of this era, but all you need to know is due to the government suppression of ideas during this era, the early 1900s, a lot of writers began to publish really important and really moving work. And basically every character in Bungo Stray Dogs is named after somebody from this era. Akutagawa, Dazai, Rampo, these are all characters from the same time period. Regardless, The Human Chair is one of the early horror stories of Japan that isn't folklore or spirit related. It starts with a woman on vacation who is walking down a long shopping street and sees a sign for a local furniture store. She's reminded of how her chair at home is really uncomfortable and seems like she wants to buy a new one, so she walks in. She goes inside and the shopkeeper is a yapper. He just keeps yapping. He opts to tell her a story of a woman named Yoshiko in the Taisho era who was a feminist writer. She got a letter in the mail one day. In the letter, it tells of another furniture craftsman who admits he feels really, really lonely at his job all the time. And thus he created a crawl space in one of his chairs that he was selling so that he can crawl right into it before it was taken for transport to the buyer. Eventually, the chair is sold to a wealthy official, and the wife of that official is a writer who would often sit in the chair. In the letter, the chairmaker says that he's fallen in love with the woman and loves it when she sits on him. Yoshiko is in horror because she's a writer, and she's the wife of an official. And she always sits on the same chair she's reading this letter on right now. A few days later, another letter comes in the mail and reassures her that the previous letter was just a manuscript. A fictional short story, do not be alarmed. She's such a good writer that he just wanted her opinion on the story, that's all. Upon believing that it's a fictional short story, she submits the story to a local newspaper as well as two of her own. When the popularity results come back, The Human Chair is #1 on the charts. She's really surprised, but not bitter about it. After all, she tells her acquaintance, who's a publisher, that she was really scared that it was real at some point. Well, a few nights pass, and she hears the plop, 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 plop of bare feet slamming on her tatami floor mats in the middle of the night. She panics and awakens her husband. She tells him that she knows it must be coming from the chair because that's the direction the footprints are going. Footprints? Foot sounds. As they start approaching the room, the footsteps suddenly stop, but Yoshiko swears that there's somebody inside the chair when she looks at it. She even sees a face coming out of it, like how they do in like movies. But Yoshiko swears that there has to be somebody inside that chair. Well, the husband takes a sword, but it's still sheathed, and he starts wailing on the chair, beating it, because he doesn't want to cut it because it was expensive. It's unclear whether he believes his wife that there's somebody in the chair or not, but he does beat it so that she feels at least a little bit more at ease. Now, a few days later, she gets a third letter, saying that the writer knows that she hasn't sat in the chair for a long while. He says that he knows his comfort as a chair is important to her creative process in writing, and that she should just give it up and just sit in them again. Well, Yoshiko and her husband get into a fight, in which he is angry and inevitably sits in the chair, only for him to suddenly freeze. Yoshiko goes and checks on him, and realizes that a small knife is peeking out through the chair and has now stabbed him in the heart. The knife kind of slithers back into the chair, and we cut back to present day where the furniture maker is still yapping and tells the protagonist that after that incident, the woman was suspected of murdering her own husband. She wasn't convicted, but she did slowly start limiting her exposure to the outside world after that. He then cuts open the back of the chair to his shop and shows the woman inside. There are 2 mummified corpses of the woman and the man inside the chair, and he tells her that Yoshiko eventually opted to join him inside the chair together forever. He tells the woman that he'd love to make her a chair just like it, and she panics and runs out. You know, bad vibes. After she's made it back home from her vacation, a moving company bangs on the door and lets themselves in, bringing a chair that looks just like the one she saw in the shop that definitely has something inside. And she screams and begs them to not bring in the dreadful chair. I like this short story, but I think I like the original by Rampo better. In the original, it ends with the writer being sent the second letter. The one that says, "Oh, don't worry, this isn't an admission of guilt. This was just a short story. Don't look in your chair." And it ends right then. There's nothing about the husband or the woman joining him or anything like that. In the original story, we don't know if there's somebody actually inside the chair. And that uneasiness is what makes it spooky. Do we trust the random letter? Why didn't the first letter begin with, "Hey, by the way, this is a manuscript"? Why did it just go right into the story? After all, if there is someone in the chair, they would have just seen how uncomfortable the letter made the woman, which is why they would send a second one. This short story by Junji Ito is good, but it takes away all of the unknowns in the way that it's not really that scary anymore. The only thing that is scary is what if somebody was inside your chair? And then that what if is over. Junji Ito's stories thrive when they have an unknown factor. Like in Billions Alone, the horror goes away when we learn who is behind it. These stories aren't bad though, and I don't want to give the impression that they're bad. I think I'm the one who's spoiled. I think by reading his best work like Tomie, Uzumaki, or even Guilt, which is my personal favorite that nobody talks about, it spoils me when I look at his earlier work that hasn't marinated or matured in his mind as long as these other ones have. It's obvious that the work that's going to span multiple volumes has marinated and is more complete and tight than the ones that just get one chapter, right? That's going to be an obvious conclusion. But I think it's also fascinating to take a look back on his earlier work and see where he gets his horror from. What do you all think of these 3 niche Junji Ito stories? Let me know in the comments. Recommend me more comics to read and talk about. I read basically everything from romance to horror, from slice of life to drama. I don't know, what's the opposite of slice of life? Basically everything's on the table. My name's Lorelai, and I'll see you next time.